All right, let's dive into one of the most, truly explosive and contradictory periods in all of American history, APUSH Period 6, what we all know as the Gilded Age. Seriously, this is where the modern United States was basically forged, in the fires of industry, massive expansion, and a whole lot of conflict.
You know, Mark Twain, who actually co-wrote the book that gave this era its name, he just hit the nail on the head with this quote. To be gilded literally just means to be covered with a super thin layer of gold. And that right there is the big idea for this entire period. You've got this glittering, shiny, prosperous surface, but underneath, hoo boy, all sorts of serious problems. We're talking corruption, staggering inequality, and major social unrest.
So, what's the time frame we're really looking at? Well, Period 6 kicks off right in 1865, like the moment the Civil War ends. The nation's focus just completely shifts from rebuilding itself to this massive, rapid expansion. And it all wraps up in 1898, right as the Spanish-American War gets going, which is when America really steps onto the world stage as a global power. Everything that happens in between, it's all about this incredible and kind of chaotic internal transformation. And hey, for those of you gearing up for that AP exam in May, you're going to want to listen up. This period, it's a pretty big chunk of the test. We're talking to anywhere from 10 to 17%. So yeah, nailing the big ideas we're about to cover is absolutely crucial if you want to lock in a high score.
Look, this is a super dense period, so we're not going to get lost in the weeds. Instead, we're going to break it all down into 4 major slices that really tell the core story. We'll hit the West, then big business, then all the social changes, and finally the political fights. Then we'll wrap it all up with the key takeaways you absolutely need to know.
All right, let's jump right into our first big slice, remaking the American West. So the Civil War is over, and the whole nation just turns its eyes west. They see this future of, boundless opportunity. Think of it as Manifest Destiny, but on an industrial scale, just pumped up with new technology. You've got millions of settlers, miners, and huge corporations all rushing in to completely transform the frontier.
You know, the real story of the West is all about this huge gap between the promise and the reality. The government promised free land with the Homestead Act, right? Sounds great. But for most people, the reality was just brutal weather and getting totally outmaneuvered by big-time speculators. And the railroads? They were supposed to be this tool for national unity, but they pretty quickly became these powerful monopolies that just squeezed farmers with insane shipping rates. And maybe the biggest one of all, that promise of opportunity for settlers, well, it came at an absolutely devastating cost to the Native American tribes who already lived there.
And we need to be really clear about this. This was not some accidental displacement. No, this was official government policy. The U.S. government actively pursued a policy of forced assimilation. The goal was to literally try and destroy Native American cultures. Tribes were forced onto reservations, and their children were sent away to these industrial schools, where they were systematically stripped of their language, their religion, their entire identity.
This quote right here from Richard Henry Pratt, who founded one of the most famous of these schools, it's just so chilling because it perfectly captures the philosophy behind the whole policy. The goal wasn't just to educate. The goal was to completely eradicate a culture. It's a brutal thing to confront, but it's an absolutely essential truth you have to understand about westward expansion.
Okay, let's shift gears to our second slice, titans and trusts. So while the West is being completely remade, an even bigger transformation is exploding back east. This is literally the birth of industrial capitalism as we know it. We're talking about an era of incredible technological marvels, gigantic factories, and corporations that were becoming more powerful than a lot of countries.
So how did this even happen? You really have to understand the corporate playbook of the time. The first big strategy was something called horizontal integration, and John D. Rockefeller was the master of this. The idea is pretty simple. You just control one crucial step of an entire industry. So Rockefeller, he just systematically bought out or flat out crushed his competitors until his company, Standard Oil, controlled over 90% of all oil refining in the US. It was pure market domination. And honestly, it's a strategy we're still debating today when we talk about big tech companies.
The second major strategy was vertical integration, and this was Andrew Carnegie's game. Instead of controlling just one step, Carnegie's goal was to control every single step of the process. He owned the iron ore mines, he owned the ships and the railroads to move the ore, and of course, he owned the mills that actually turned it all into steel. This created these incredible efficiencies and, well, it made it pretty much impossible for anyone else to even try to compete. So what's the verdict on guys like Rockefeller and Carnegie? This right here captures the central debate of the Gilded Age. Were they captains of industry?
These brilliant visionaries who built America, created amazing efficiencies, and then gave back through philanthropy? Or were they robber barons, ruthless monopolists who got rich by exploiting their workers and corrupting politics? And listen, this is not just some dusty old historical debate. It echoes in the exact same way we talk about today's tech billionaires and their impact on our world.
Okay, let's move on to our third slice, because all this industrial power had a massive impact on society itself. You've got these new factories and the incredible wealth they were creating. They basically acted like a giant magnet, pulling millions of people from the American countryside and from all over the globe into these rapidly growing and, frankly, chaotic cities. And a really key shift during this time was who was arriving in America. Before, most immigrants came from Northern and Western Europe. Think Germany, Ireland, Great Britain. But the Gilded Age brought this huge wave of what we call new immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe. Places like Italy, Poland, Russia, and also from Asia. Now, these folks provided the essential labor that fueled the factories, but they also faced intense prejudice and discrimination, sparking these huge national debates about identity and assimilation that, let's be honest, are still shaping our country today.
So, faced with dangerous working conditions and really low pay, workers started to organize, and the two biggest unions that emerged had totally different ideas on how to do it. First, you had the Knights of Labor. They had this big, radical vision, one giant union for everyone, skilled, unskilled, women, Black Americans, all fighting for sweeping social reforms. Then you had the American Federation of Labor, the AFL. They were much more pragmatic. They focused only on skilled workers and fought for practical bread-and-butter goals, like higher wages and better hours. And after the Haymarket Affair unfairly tied the Knights to violence, the more conservative AFL ended up becoming the leading voice for American labor.
But for so many of these workers and immigrants, the American dream, it looked a lot more like a nightmare. Millions of people were packed into tenements, these dark, unbelievably crowded, and unsanitary apartment buildings. And the grim reality of this world was really dragged into the light by this pioneering photojournalist named Jacob Riis. His book, How the Other Half Lives, used these just shocking photographs to force the middle class to finally confront the ugly poverty that their shiny new industrial society was created.
All right, on to our final slice, politics and the populist revolt. So, with all these massive changes happening so fast, a lot of ordinary Americans started to feel like the government was either way too corrupt to help them, or even worse, that it was actively siding with the rich and powerful. And this feeling sparked a huge debate about what the role of government should even be in society, a debate that, should sound really familiar.
The official idea floating around at the time was laissez-faire. It's a French term that basically means let it be, the ideal being that the government should just keep its hands off the economy. But here's the massive paradox. In reality, the government was involved all the time, but almost always on the side of big business. It was handing out huge land grants and subsidies to railroads, using federal troops to break up strikes, and passing high tariffs to protect corporations from competition. So it was really hands-off when it came to helping the poor, but very hands-on when it came to helping the powerful.
So in response to all this, you had frustrated farmers and workers who decided to fight back. They formed a brand new political party, the People's Party, better known as the Populists. And their platform, for the time, was seriously radical. They were calling for government ownership of the railroads, a graduated income tax so the rich would finally pay their fair share, and the direct election of senators to cut down on corruption. Now, the Populist Party itself didn't last long, but their ideas, many of them stuck around. It's just a great reminder that ideas that seem totally radical in one era can become the common sense of the next.
Okay, let's bring it all home. What's the bottom line? What are the absolute must-know, essential themes you need to take away from the Gilded Age, especially for that exam? Let's do a super quick recap.
First up, westward expansion. It completely transformed the nation's geography and its economy, but it came at a devastating cost to Native American societies. Second, industrialization. It created just immense wealth and corporate power, but it also led to massive economic inequality and social conflict. Third, social change. You've got workers, immigrants, and a brand new middle class all reshaping American society and culture, which led to a ton of new tensions. And finally, number 4, reform movements. In response to all this, ordinary Americans started challenging political corruption and the power of big business, sparking those debates about the government's role that we are, you guessed it, still having today.
And that leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. The Gilded Age was all about building bigger, faster, more efficient systems. In railroads, in steel, in oil, you name it. But the debates from that time force us to ask a question that is maybe more relevant now than ever. When does all that efficiency, that concentration of wealth and power, become too powerful? When does it become a threat to society itself? Because the arguments they had back then about inequality, wealth, and regulation, they are the exact same arguments we're having right now, just with different names and different technologies. Definitely something to think about.